Continued from the previous file, Pygmalion. Page 13. Pygmalion, title source. The play Pygmalion deals with the teaching of English pronunciation, the method of teaching and ultimate outcome. Its title immediately reminds us of the great legend of Pygmalion and Galatea. Shaw has apparently taken his title from this legend. In ancient Greece, according to the legend in Ovid's Metamorphoses, Pygmalion was a famous Grecian sculptor. He could find nothing good in women, and that is why he decided to lead his life as a bachelor. However, he sculpted a statue of a woman with ivory, and that was so beautiful and so charming that he felt attracted to it. In bracket, that is his own artistic creation, bracket closed. That statue was so accurately perfect that no living being could be equal to that. He was so infatuated towards his own creation that in a religious festival he prayed to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, for the purpose of planting life to that statue and thereby turning the statue into a living woman named Galatea. When he returned home, he became overwhelmed as well as amused to find that his prayer had been approved, and he decided to marry the statue named Galatea. In Shaw's play Pygmalion, the legend has underlying connection so far as the initial action and events of the play are concerned. Professor Henry Higgins is a renowned phonetician. His character is, as Shaw mentions in the preface of the present play, an imitation of the then contemporary linguist Henry Sweet. Professor Higgins behaves like legendary Pygmalion in teaching the flower girl Eliza Doolittle so that she can forget her Cockney dialectal accent and can utter standard English like a duchess. However, Higgins is a cynical man and does not develop friendship with the women. His attitude to women is conveyed through the speech, quote, "I find that the moment I let a woman make friends with me, she becomes jealous, exacting, suspicious, and a damned nuisance." Unquote. This attitude is in conformity with Pygmalion's attitude to women at the initial stage. However, when Higgins comes in contact with Eliza, an uncouth and uneducated girl, he with an extraordinary zeal takes the challenge of developing in her the duchess-like behavior and manner of speaking. In course of teaching, the expected result takes place, and it makes her into a sophisticated, aristocratically presentable girl. She is compared to Pygmalion's Galatea, but unlike Galatea, Eliza develops a soul of her own and a fierce independence from her creator, who ignored her feelings and was concerned with her only as a human talking machine. In the original legend, the creator fell in love with his creation, while in the present play, though the creator, here Higgins, has tried to present his creation, here Eliza, as a sophisticated lady, sense, soul, they are not united. Shaw seems to have provided no tender affection to grow between professor and the pupils. Page 14. Characters in Pygmalion. Professor Henry Higgins. Professor Higgins is a 40-year-old bachelor. He specializes in phonetics, especially the phonetics of English. He is a renowned authority on the subject of dialects, accents, and pronunciation. He is modeled after the well-established English phonetician Henry Sweet. Eliza Doolittle. Eliza, in bracket also called Liza, bracket close, is a flower girl of 20 years. She is an uneducated, uncouth gutter snipe with unrefined Cockney accent. Professor Higgins takes the challenge of refining and moulding her accent into a standard one which a duchess is expected to have. Alfred Doolittle. Alfred is Eliza's father. He belongs to the community of the, quote, undeserving poor, unquote. He feels proud of his position. He is a dirtman having sonorous voice and Welsh accent. Colonel Pickering. Colonel Pickering is a well-educated and well-known retired officer, and he has great inclination to learn language. He has authored spoken Sanskrit. He has come to England to meet the famous phonetician Professor Higgins. He wants to share the knowledge of phonetics with Professor Higgins. He courteously and politely behaves with Eliza and observes and participates in Higgins' experiments in teaching Eliza to speak English as a duchess. Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins is the mother of Professor Higgins. She loves him too much, but she does not approve of his manners, his language use, in brackets, spatially way of speaking a stylized speech, bracket closed, and also his social behavior. Mrs. Eynsford Hills. She is a lady of the upper middle class. Her condition, both financial and social, seems to be impoverished. In spite of that, she is frantic to stick to her gentility vacuously. Clara Eynsford Hills. Clara is the daughter of Mrs. Eynsford Hills. She consciously attempts to act the role of a so-called modern advanced young girl. She is shallow in her knowledge and manners. Freddie Eynsford Hills. Freddie is the son of Mrs. Eynsford Hills. He is a young man of pleasing personality. He is attracted by Eliza at their first meeting. Mrs. Pierce. Mrs. Pierce is Professor Higgins's housekeeper of long standing. It is she who foresees the difficulty in teaching Eliza standard pronunciation so that she can act like a duchess. She possesses the practical knowledge of societal relationship. Page 15. Pygmalion, a detailed summary. Act 1. The locale of Act 1 is Covent Garden under the portico of St. Paul's Church in London. The action takes place during a heavy summer rain at 11:15 p.m. People are busy in taking shelter after the end of a theatrical performance. They belong to different strata of society. They are huddling there to avoid the rain. There are one lady named Mrs. Eynsford Hill and her daughter Clara who are in evening dress. The mother is complaining to Clara that Freddie, her son, has gone for a long time in search of a cab. To their surprise, Freddie comes from Southampton Street with the information that there is not a cab to be hired for love or money. They are not happy with this information and reprimand him for not trying hard to trace and get a cab from other place. In reply, Freddie informs them that they are all engaged. The rain was so sudden, nobody was prepared, and everybody had to take a cab. In spite of his frantic attempt in search of a cab, he is misunderstood and he is again asked to try again. At the command of his mother and sister, Freddie opens his umbrella and dashes off strandwards, but comes into collision with a flower girl, in bracket Eliza Doolittle, bracket closed, who is hurrying in for a shelter, knocking her basket out of her hands. Her basket contains flowers. In reaction to that incident, the girl calls him Freddy, in bracket his name, bracket close, and tells him to watch where he is going. She uses an almost incomprehensible Cockney dialect. Sitting there, she begins to rearrange her flowers and mumbles to herself about the careless and dashy movements of people like Freddy who knock others about. Mrs. Eynsford Hill has witnessed the episode entirely and develops a curiosity as to how this low-class, badly dressed ragamuffin with such a horrible accent could possibly know her son by name. The flower girl asks first if the lady will pay for the flowers already spoilt by Freddy, and she reacts against Clara's objection. Freddy's mother pays the girl with generous attitude and then comes to know from Eliza that the latter normally calls all strangers either Freddy or Charlie. At this time, an elderly gentleman of the amiable military tribe rushes in to take shelter and closes a dripping umbrella. He is in the same plight as Freddy, very wet about the ankles. He is in evening dress with a light overcoat. He takes the place left vacant by the daughter. Eliza tries to sell him some flowers, but he refuses, not because he does not want to have flowers, but because he has nothing smaller than a sovereign. Eliza insists that she can change a large coin. At this moment, a bystander, page 16, creeps in between them and wants the flower girl to be careful as the stranger is taking down everything she says. Eliza firmly and with a louder voice declares her right to sell flowers. Quote, "If keep off the curb," unquote. Her loud and continued insistence on the point of her right attracts the attention of everyone, and she continues until the note taker, in bracket Professor Henry Higgins, bracket close, asks her to shut up. He expresses his resentment for the fact that flower girl mistakes him as a policeman or a spy. Eliza is curious to know what he has written, and when she cannot read the quote shorten unquote, he reads off what he has written in an exact Cockney phonetic representation of her own speech pattern. This event draws the attention of all present there. The elderly gentleman, in bracket Colonel Pickering, bracket close, and others take the side of the girl, and when they begin to talk to Higgins, the latter begins to identify where each of the speaker was born and where they were brought up and lived. He also claims that he can have the capacity even to identify their localities inside the city of London. When Mrs. Eynsford Hill complains about the weather, Higgins points out that the rain has stopped. Everyone disperses after the stop of the rain, leaving Higgins, Pickering and the flower girl there. In course of their conversation, we come to know that Colonel Pickering, who is a distinguished retired officer, is now a student of Indian dialects and has authored spoken Sanskrit. Higgins introduces himself as Henry Higgins, the author of Higgins' Universal Alphabet. It is also learned that Pickering has come to England to meet Higgins, and that Higgins has also intention to embark on a journey to India to meet Pickering. When they are about to depart together to discuss their mutual interest, Eliza interrupts with a prayer for money, stating that she is short for her lodging. Higgins reminds her that she is lying because she earlier said that she could charge a half-crown. However, he throws her a mess of coins which she excitedly scoops up, uttering all sorts of unintelligible Cockney sounds. At this point, Freddie returns with a cab, but by then his mother and sister left the place. He remains undecided on what he should do with it. Eliza thanks him for getting the money unexpectedly from Higgins and immediately engages the cab to take her home, leaving Freddie alone and perplexed. Next day at 11 a.m. at Higgins' laboratory in Wimpole Street. It is a room on the first floor, looking on the street, and was meant for the drawing room. Pickering is seated at the table, putting down some cards and a tuning fork which he has been using. Higgins is standing up near him. He appears in the morning light as a robust, vital, appealizing sort of man of 40 or thereabouts. Higgins is seen busy, page 17, in having discussion about vowel sounds with Pickering. He is making demonstration relating to how he manages to record voices of people on the gadgets and then later to these recorded speeches at leisure and analyze them scientifically. In reaction to Higgins' demonstration, Pickering praises the latter's endeavor and sincere involvement in this study as he utters, quote, "Yes, it is a fearful strain. I rather fancied myself because I can pronounce 24 distinct vowel sounds. But your 130 beat me. I can't hear a bit of difference between most of them." Unquote. At this moment, their discussion is interrupted by the entrance of Mrs. Pierce, Higgins' housekeeper. She announces that there is a strange girl, quote, "quite a common girl," unquote, asking for the professor. Higgins gets excited and instructs Mrs. Pierce to show her up since he is likely to be interested in her accent. This would be a good opportunity to record her voice in the presence of Pickering. It will enable him to show Pickering how he records using various pieces of his equipment being demonstrated. Eliza, the flower girl of previous night, enters. She is now dressed in an outlandish outfit consisting of, among other things, 3 ostrich feathers of orange, sky blue and red. Higgins immediately recognizes her and asks her to go away, telling her that he has already recorded enough of her type of, quote, "Listen Grove lingo," unquote. However, Eliza is found to have come by a taxi. Still, Higgins is not in a mood to listen to her and asks her in a rude voice, quote, "Shall we ask this baggage to sit down or shall we throw her out of the window?" Unquote. On the other hand, Pickering seems to be sympathetic towards her and she turns to him and states that she is in search of a job as a lady in a flower shop, but she will not be able to have that job unless she can speak in a genteel, ladylike fashion. For this purpose, she has come to take speech training from Professor Higgins, as last night he bragged about his capability to teach proper speech to anyone. She also informs him that she is even ready to pay as much as a shilling an hour. Higgins calculates that Eliza's offer is a certain proportion of her daily income and therefore represents for her a large payment. At this time, Pickering was also attracted by the course of the conversation between them regarding the fees for speech training, and he says, quote, I'll bet you all the expenses of the experiment, unquote. He also tells Higgins that the letter cannot teach the girl to speak, quote, like a duchess in 6 months' time and pass her off at an ambassador's garden party as a lady, unquote. Pickering further argues with the tone of irony, quote, and I'll pay for the lesson, unquote, since the lessons are 25 cents an hour. Higgins immediately gets tempted to accept the challenge, which is tremendously great as Eliza is, quote, so deliciously low, so horribly dirty, unquote. He decides to carry out the task of making a, quote, duchess of this draggle-tailed gutter snipe, unquote, in 6 months. Quote, in 3 if she has a good ear and a quick tongue, unquote. Page 18. Higgins gets enthused and orders Mrs. Pierce to take her away, to scrub her down, to burn her clothes and to get her new ones. And if she makes any noise, he says, Mrs. Pierce should, quote, wallop her, unquote. Listening to the orders of Professor Higgins, Mrs. Pierce and Eliza seem to be horrified. Mrs. Pierce argues that probably the girl is married or that she might have parents who may object to the decision of Professor Higgins. Her parents might have turned her out in order to earn her own living over 2 years ago. At this point, Higgins ignores her plight and concentrates on her only as an object of his study, ignoring her feelings, which Pickering points out. It is Higgins who is concerned mainly with the immediate problem relating to Eliza, that is, her pronunciation and her grammar. Finding no other way out, Mrs. Pierce leaves, expressing her wonder regarding the future of Eliza. Higgins' response in reaction to her wonder seems to be one about what will become of her if he leaves her alone. To him, it makes no difference. When they are through, quote, we can throw her back into the gutter and then it will be her own business again, unquote. In reaction to this, Eliza revolts, but Higgins tempts her with some chocolate and with the thought of some young men wanting to marry her. Eliza relents and Mrs. Pierce takes her to the bathroom to be washed. After some time, Eliza is seen in a spare bathroom on the 3rd floor where Mrs. Pierce insists her on having a bath. She is appalled by the idea of having daily bath and so raises a protest that it would kill her. Amid much dramatic histrionics and truly heartrending cries, Eliza gets her first proper bath under the supervision of Mrs. Pierce. In the meantime, Pickering, as a reaction to the suggestion which Mrs. Pierce left, develops an interest in the morality of their adventure. He questions if Higgins is, quote, a man of good character where women are concerned, unquote. Higgins argues that he has never known how to deal with women because the moment you let a woman into your life, she becomes, quote, jealous, exacting, suspicious and a damned nuisance, unquote. He further states that the moment a man develops friendship with a woman, he becomes, quote, selfish and tyrannical, unquote. He declares that he is a confirmed old bachelor and decides to remain the same. He also asserts that Pickering must be sure that he will not take any sort of advantage of Eliza. By the time Mrs. Pierce enters Higgins' laboratory carrying Eliza's hat and asks Higgins to be conscious of his own behavior towards the young girl, she further cautions that her master should attempt to stop swearing use better table manners, and try to act more like a gentleman. Mrs. Pierce then replies the doorbell and informs Higgins that a dustman, Alfred Doolittle, is waiting outside and demands that his daughter has been kept inside the house of Higgins. Pickering advises Higgins with a warning that this might be a trap and Mrs. Doolittle and Mr. Doolittle might be a scoundrel. Continued in the next file.